I wanted to start off with Sycamore.
Okay. Way back in the day. We're
We,
taking the time machine. I like it.
we're taking the time machine and we're going to your talent TED Talk at Sycamore, where you specifically talked about how to create and pursue opportunities. It's just fascinating to see you at that. It's over 10 years ago, I think. And in this conversation, you kind of touch on how you went about pursuing opportunities at that age when you were just coming out of high school and getting into college. But you said something very interesting. I want to start off with that. You said, I was sitting in a meeting and almost everyone in the meeting was twice as old as me. And that was something. When you walk in a meeting and everybody's twice as old as you are, you've got a tendency not to get taken very seriously.
That's very true.
Talk to me about you as like a 17-year-old or 18-year-old. Like, what were you like, and how did you put yourself in these situations?
I think what's interesting is it's really easy to get into a room. It's probably much easier to get into a room then than it is now, but it's much easier to be taken seriously in that room now than it was then. And I think the same still applies across like high school students, college students. It's really easy to get into rooms by saying, hey, I'm a student, I'm working on this, I'd love 20 minutes of your time, whatever that. There's a million different how to craft that cold outreach articles out there in the world. But I think as a student, your superpower is basically opening doors. Who doesn't want to help out a student that's interested in some topic, that wants to pick their brain, kind of a thing? But the very same, you're a student and you're learning and I should help you, which is what gets you into the room, then dramatically plays against you in being taken seriously in the room, because it's you're a student, you're learning, why should I listen to your opinion? So it gives you more opportunities, but it's harder to convert those opportunities. And I think for me, the way I always looked at it was needing to prove that you have enough experience to be worth listening to. So you can use the student angle to get into the room, and then you need to understand that you're not taken seriously. And you have a duty to kind of prove and convince that you have a level of experience and expertise, and then you can be taken seriously. So you need to understand that as a multi-step process, and you need to be very intentional about using the beginning of whatever that opportunity looks like to establish that credibility so that you then have the chance to make a point.
When you did not have any experience and you didn't know what that particular subject or whatever you were pursuing was all about, how did you go about developing expertise?
Actually, same way as I do a lot of things today, which is asking a lot of questions. I don't know this for a fact. It's a feeling that I have, and I hoped if someone were to pull the stats from the AI meeting recorder, my goal is always to ask significantly more questions than I make statements. And I think that's really important when you're learning. And I think that's also really important when you're teaching. I don't want to, in many cases, tell people what to do. I want them to come with recommendations, and I don't want to tell them, no, you're wrong, right? That's not a teachable moment. What I want to do, if I do think that they're wrong, I may also be wrong, right, is to kind of challenge the assumptions and challenge the conclusion by asking questions. Have you considered this? What about this scenario? How would you think about this, right? And sometimes that naturally leads people to be like, oh yeah, I didn't think about that. That's a really good point. In that case, maybe we should do this way. Or, oh yeah, because of this information, we should do this. And it's like, well, I didn't think about that information. Yes, you are right, right? I think it's humility, but it's approaching everything with kind of a learning mindset and approaching everything question first. I think whether you're learning or you're teaching, it's kind of universally the right approach.
Oh, were you always like that? Were you always very curious, asking questions?
Yeah, I was always very curious is a polite way to put it. My parents would probably call it annoying. I was always very annoying, asking questions about everything. You have the stereotype of the 6-year-old who's like, why? For me, that wasn't a phase. That's been kind of my entire life, has been like, oh, why? But why? But why? And like, digging deeper and deeper. And then I was always a tinker. I like to do things with my hands. And as a kid, I love to take things apart. Sometimes I could put them back together, which was great. Sometimes I couldn't, and that led to bigger issues. But I was always fascinated by like taking the toaster apart. How does the toaster work? I have a screwdriver. Let's find out. Sometimes we have to buy a new toaster. Or taking, computers apart, taking other things apart. I've always been curious, and I've always kind of learned by doing versus learning by studying or theorizing, or I've always been a builder in that sense.
So what are your thoughts on how you went to UIUC, and we'll touch on the Thiel stuff, but what do you think, how would you have gone about schooling differently? Because it seems like generally college is very not learning by doing situation, but learning by theory and much more reading overall. What are your thoughts on that? How would you do that differently if you were
Well, I
doing college
hated my
again?
college experience. It was the worst. I tried to do a lot of things that were outside kind of the normal mold, and a lot of those things did not work out for me. I went into engineering, which is probably not a surprise when you hear about tinkering and you hear about questioning and you hear about, kind of quote unquote, like working with your hands and wanting to build things and take things apart. I think engineering is kind of a natural fit there. There's a certain level of learning by doing, especially in a computer engineering program, on the computer science side of that. There's a lot of doing things by writing code, which is very much a learning by doing opportunity. And on the kind of double E side, there's quite a bit of learning by doing. Whether it's kind of robotics labs or it's assembling some sort of physical thing. That was really the main reason I went Compy versus CS. Was I really enjoyed the physical tinkering side of things, and I wanted to have labs where we built some sort of a line following robot, which involved the creation of the robot from a hardware perspective, and then also the coding of the logic. My fear going exclusively on the CS track was that I would be too much in the digital world and I would miss the physical tinkering and playing with things. And I think overall, that's probably why I didn't go into hard sciences. That's why I didn't go into, math for the sake of math. I went into math for the sake of calculating something that I could then go do, not math for the sake of the theoretical, mathematics problems.
Did you ever get interested in frats?
Not really. I spent most of my time, actually, what I was about to say is not actually quite true. I spent most of my time building startups while I was in college. I was going to say I spent most of my time going to class, but that's let's just be honest, I did not. And I had very, very little time left for, honestly, any sort of social activity. I had a fairly small friend group. I don't think that I enjoyed the college experience. And,
Mm.
it's always tough looking back in one way. I think that what I did and how I allocated my time is part of what has brought me to the point where I am today. And it's a point where I'm very happy and grateful to be. But on the other side, I also regret not having the more typical college experience. I kind of regret not taking the opportunity to have a bunch of those friends and, for better or for worse, to have some college stories. And like, I don't have those experiences. And part of me thinks that there's always more time to build businesses, to achieve, some level of success, or to make money, or there's always more time to do that. But to have those college experiences is very much a time boxed chapter. And that chapter of my life is over without me, having had a lot of those experiences. But then again, have to balance that with, I probably wouldn't be where I am now had I gone and indexed on that instead of building startups, learning how to create products, launching things, tinkering, if you will.
But where did this start? Like, when did you first go, hey, I think I would be interested in going the entrepreneurial route and really like pursuing that?
Kind of my go-to story for this is when I haven't told this in a while. I was probably 10, 12, no, I was older than that, 14, something like that. I always wanted candy and other stuff like most kids. And my parents were certainly very nice to me, right? Like I can't say that I had a terrible or deprived childhood by any any sense of the imagination. Don't take it in that direction. But they also weren't the types of parents, probably for many very good reasons, to be kind of spoiling with like, oh, I want this, here you go. I want this, here you go. I want this, here you go.
Mm.
They tried to teach me early on the value of money, the value of kind of working for things. So a lot of the times when I was like, hey, I want that, the answer was like, sure, like you're welcome to buy it. How much money do you have? And when I was a little kid, I would earn money doing chores, and then I would earn money based off of my schooling, right? So like doing well in a class, I would get some money. Getting a perfect score on a quiz, I would get $1. It was always tied to some sort of a performance-based milestone. I'm probably the only 6-year-old on the planet with a performance-based comp plan. But it worked. It worked. And then as I got older, the things that I wanted were more and more expensive, and like $5 here, $10 here doesn't cut it. So eventually I realized, like, shit, I need to get a job, right? Like, that's how people make real money, not $1 here, $5 here. It's
Not
no
this
longer a stick of
contract
gum.
position with my parents.
Yes, exactly. Not this equity. I don't want ESOPs. I want cash. And when I was, again, I don't remember exactly, let's call it 14. It's really hard for a 14-year-old to find a job. Like, even applying to McDonald's to flip burgers or cook French fries, they're not taking a 14-year-old. There's too many legal headaches and things of that nature. So my parents helped me think about what skill sets I had and how I could potentially monetize those skill sets. So I thought, like, you like to tinker with things. You're good with computers. You help us fix the computer all the time. And that turned into, like, we have a bunch of family friends. If I fix their computers from time to time, they might pay me $20. Like, this was in the world before the kind of Best Buy Geek Squad stuff. And then that eventually turned into probably my mother's least favorite activity, where she would drive me to strangers' houses and I would fix their computers. And I learned like very basic HTML, and I created a website and business cards and the whole, basically computer repair type business. And then I did that for a while. I got older. I got a driver's license. I got a car. I was able to go on my own. And then I found some very nerdy friends who also had similar skill sets. So then I hired them as subcontractors, and then they would go and fix people's things, and I would take a cut from the public. That was kind of the start of this whole process. And it all came back to, I want this thing, but it costs money. How do I generate basically cash for myself, i.e. how do I generate cash flow?
It started off with wanting, like, it was like very material things, basically. Like, okay, I want these things, so I want to have cash.
Yeah, you're a 14-year-old kid. You want a new Xbox. It's been so long now that I don't remember what the things were, but I want some material thing. It costs $500. I'm not going to get $500, $1 at a time. How do I basically trade time and skills for money, which is the way our world works? And as a 14-year-old, you have to come up with very unique ways to do that, because you can't go through the traditional McDonald's, Chipotle kind of. When you think about people who had jobs during college, a lot of them work in coffee shops and things like that's not available to a 14-year-old.
Right.
You don't have those kind of labor type positions. Since the Industrial Revolution and the regulation of America, you just can't go work in the coal mines anymore as like an 8-year-old. It's such a shame.
It's a hard life. No, don't worry, it's still happening in India, so you can always come here. So actually, this is interesting. The reason I was asking what you were driven by then is because I wanted to know, how has what you are driven by changed since you were at that age and now? If it's changed, what has changed?
This is a great question. It's very top of mind. I had lunch with a friend a few weeks ago who I absolutely respect beyond a shadow. Like, one of the people I respect the most who I've ever been inspired. And he recommended a book, which is actually, you can't see my desk, but it's sitting here on the desk. He gave me a copy of The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. And one of the things that the book talks about, and it's my kind of book because the book comes with a worksheet. So you get to put practical application, not just theoretical. And one of the things that the book really stresses is on better understanding yourself, and both who you are today and who you want to become. And most importantly, who you need to become as a person in order to achieve the goals that you want for your life. And that comes with better understanding and really evaluating what your core values are as a person, what your why is as a person, for not your business, but for your life in general. So it's something that I've been reevaluating a lot. And when I was a kid, it was extremely material, right? I want Xbox. I want the new Guitar Hero. And then as I got older, it moved into experiences. I want to go and travel to this country. I want to stay at a nicer hotel. I want to fly in a lie flat seat versus an economy seat. I want to go and try this tasting menu at this restaurant. And then I think it shifted to much more egotistical things. And you can argue that kind of everything is ego driven, and it probably is. But it was, I want to be known for something. Right? I don't want to be famous in the Hollywood celebrity sense, but like I want people to know the name Kevin Lehtiniitty and to know that this was created for some reason, right? And when I think about this, I think of all the very successful entrepreneurs that I respect that have named the companies after their last names, right? Of like, I want to be known as this was me. And that doesn't feel right anymore. That was the motivation kind of most recently. It was like, I want Kevin Lehtiniitty to be known for something. And now that feels wrong. And I haven't quite found what the new motivation is. There is a lot of motivation in building Borderless that comes from proving myself right, which I think is a very powerful source of motivation. But more than that, it's wanting to see a change for others. And I'm not Mother Teresa here. I'm not like dedicating my life to feeding the homeless or going through some, very charitable thing. But Borderless feels a lot less about wanting others to know what I've done and feels a lot more about solving problems for others to improve the global quality of life. And we're doing that through, improving payments, but then proving things to myself. And no one else needs to know that I did these things. Other people don't matter. Their opinions and recognition don't really matter to me in this current motivation that I have. But proving it to myself really does matter, and it matters tremendously. And I'm certainly not immune to the opinions of others, right? If you stood me in front of a line of 20 people who all called me a moron and pointed out lots of mistakes and failures I've made in the past, I probably wouldn't stand there and be like, well, that's other people's opinions, Sarthak. I don't care. Like, I would really care, and I would probably be sad and pretty pissed off. So there is still external validation, but I feel like the validation that I seek has recently shifted a lot more from external to internal.
What has shifted in you for this shift?
I don't know. That's an excellent question. And that's part of why I've read this book twice now. I'm in the past 2 weeks, and I've been kind of diving into similar things more, is because I'm recognizing this change, but I don't understand where it's coming from. And the answer is probably not in a book. The answer is probably, somewhere in myself. But I'm trying to dig into this right now, and I'm trying to kind of understand what's driving this. And I think that's really important to understand, because at the end of the day, there's only so many years that we get on this planet, depending on your religious beliefs. And I want to make sure that the years that I do have, I'm spending doing the things that I find meaningful. And I'm not spending them doing things that I think other people want me to do, or I'm not, wasting them sitting on the couch watching Netflix, although I do love binging a good Netflix show. That I'm spending my life doing the things that bring me meaning.
And this kind of ties back into the TED talk you did about, the duality of situations, right? Like the fact that you were a student at the same time pursuing entrepreneurship, but this duality that constantly exists. I've seen this change in my own life, for example, across this past year, where there's a certain motivation that attracts a certain kind of person to you, and a certain kind of friend group to your motivation, because you were first driven by recognition, and in that moment you tend to attract people that are also driven by that recognition. Then when you kind of go beyond that, is I think you just attract a different friend group, and there's this weird middle ground where you will have friends and a close network of people that would still be attached to that previous version of you that's driven by that, but then you're like transitioning to this different place where you might find other people that are more in line with how you think now. But in that middle ground, you're sort of neither here nor there, and you're in this middle ground where you're trying to just like go to the next stage of your evolution. And that's like the lonely chapter, because you're you're trying to figure out what it is. There's very few people that can understand it. There's very few people who can like talk about this topic too, that will resonate and give you the right questions. How the people that you do respect, what do you see in them that you want to embody in the future?
You sound exactly like page 7 of the Compound Effect workbook. No, it's, I have a ton of thoughts on this. So I'll throw some maybe not super sequitur things at you, but I think they're all worth saying. I think one of the things that I notice the most about myself in this change is you're talking about friend groups. And I've often had friend groups that are in kind of entrepreneurial and that are about building, and that just happens to be my personality. So, a lot of that manifests in my friends group. And kind of in the past, when I've seen others succeed, and this is a terrible thing to admit, but I'm a very honest and transparent person, so might as well. It's often sparked at least a little bit of jealousy, if not, more jealous. Like, wow, that person's like really doing well. I'm a little jealous of all the success they're having, the growth rate of their startup. And I'm still a highly competitive person, right? I run an Introspection. Job description is extremely simple as CEO of Introspection. My job is to win championships. That's what I do for a living. And I am hyper competitive within my category. So within the vertical of companies that we compete against, I am insanely competitive, and we are going to win, and we are going to be the category defining business. That's hands down. It's inevitable. But now when I see friends and others who are succeeding in other verticals, I have nothing but joy and excitement for them. Right? It's like if I run a football team and I see another football team doing really well, my only job is to go beat them. But if I see a basketball team doing really well, I'm no longer jealous about the success of this basketball team. I'm now legitimately and from the bottom of my heart happy for my friends who are on that basketball team and all the success that they've had. And I think that's been kind of a giant shift in my perception of things. And one of the things that I have recently done is really thought about what my core values are. And one of the things that I think is great about the way this book structures things is you start from a very broad set, right? You start from what values are important to you. And it's like, list 20 values that are important to you or something like that. And then it's, think about the people that you respect the most in this world. What are their core values? And then it's think about the people that you despise the most in this world. What are their core values? And then it's what values do you value that you have in common with the people you respect? And then it takes the 20 to 10, makes you take the 10 to 6, then makes you take the 6 down to 3. What are your, 3 core values? And one of the things that I respect the most about the particular individual who gave me this book is that they are extremely supportive of the people in their orbit. Whether the people in their orbit are building startups, whether they are doing something in athletics, whether they're doing something in the arts, this person legitimately wants and helps as much as they can every single person in their orbit succeed the most at whatever it is that they are trying to do. And I think that you often have a lot of people who want their friends to be successful, but not as successful as them, right? And you also have a lot of people who, I think parents are very guilty of this, who want their kids to succeed, but they want their kids to succeed in the same way they succeeded, right? You have a lot of parents that push kids into the same career paths or the same, sorts of molds. This person almost has transcended those things. It's just like, if you want to be a painter, I have no experience in that, but is there anything I can do to help you be the greatest painter of all time? Do you want to be an artist? Is there anything that I can do to help you be the greatest artist of all time? And it may be, I know nothing about this, but I have a friend who owns an art gallery. Do you want to connect? That may be as much as I can offer. Or it may be, hey, here's a book I love that's just about life and about your personal values that has helped me a lot. Or it could be, I know 12 amazing customers that are looking for this. Let me make, that level of intro. And the amount of help that can be offered obviously vastly depends based off of what the person's trying to accomplish. But the intent and the execution is the same every time. Just what can I give with no expectation of anything in return to help you be the greatest of all time with no judgment on what you're doing. Oh, you're going to be an artist, Sarthak? That's dumb. You should be an engineer. Like zero judgment. Just what can I give to help you be the best?
Man, this opens up a whole host of questions. But okay, so do you think that that is something you can imbibe or embody at an earlier age, like giving at all situations in your life? You said we're, inherently we do things because of our ego inherently. And like, could this conversation be had with Kevin at 23, 22?
I don't think so. I don't think so. And I don't think it's a quantifiable age thing. It's kind of a qualitative emotional maturity thing. And not necessarily me because I was 22, but me where I was emotionally when I was 22. There was no way that this would have stuck. I don't think I'd had enough perspectives. I had not had enough life experiences, whether positive or negative. I didn't have enough kind of understanding of backgrounds. And that's where I'm sitting today at 30, right? If we had this conversation 10 years from now, I might tell you, StarTech boy, was I a moron at 30. I was trying this whole giving to others thing, and that was a complete disaster. That I don't know. But I do think there is a lot of value, especially when you're being introspective and you're trying to figure out kind of what the next. I think of life in 5 and 10 year clips, and turning 30 is now the start of both a new 5-year and a 10-year clip. So for me, it's the beginning of a new, major chapter that's going to have 2 parts. And that's a good time to be introspective. And I think it is really valuable to sit down and think of, okay, who are the 5 people that I really respect, and why do I respect them? Do I respect them just because they're successful? Do I respect them because they have a cool car? Do I respect them because they've got really trendy haircuts? Like, these are all terrible examples, right? Or, do I respect them because of their generosity? Do I respect them because of their follow through? There are very few people in the world who I have met that have done what they have said every time. Right? I have met tons of people who I think have been well-intentioned. And when they say something, they have always intended to do it. That's certainly the way that I've thought of myself. Right? I'm like, oh my God, here, I'll do this. I've never meant to be deceitful or underhanded. I've always genuinely meant to go and do that thing. But quite often, I don't. And it's not because I didn't want to. It's I got busy, or other things happened in my life, or I forgot, or there's very, very few people that have that 100% follow through rate, where when they say something, it's as good as a signed contract. Basically, there's no forgetting, there's no changing your mind, there's no nothing, right? I think for me, that's a really admirable value that I'm striving towards as well. I circle back to people like 12 days later. It's like, oh, sorry, I forgot about your text. I admire people that are always highly responsive and on it. And that doesn't necessarily mean that if I text you at 2 a.m., you text me back in 5 minutes. But I admire people that are able to juggle all of these different, communications and who, it's like, hey, I have an issue, I'm going to reach out to my friend. And they're always responsive very quickly, trying to help. I value a lot of those things. I think it's useful to look at that. Look at the 5 people in your life that you respect the most and figure out not just the surface level reason why, but really dig into what values and what behaviors do they have that make you respect that person to that degree. And is that a value or behavior that you want to have? Because you're also not that person, right? You're your own person. So you're not going to agree with every single value of every single person you respect. You don't want to just become a copycat of them. My dog has a
Speaking of cat,
there's the cat there, there's the dog somewhere here.
So you touched on this, which is very interesting, because I think you said find the 5 people around you that you respect, but also the 5 people that you kind of don't want to be like. And
yes,
I think that side is quite underrated. It tells you so much so quickly, but also I think when I've noticed this, for example, when I notice that someone else is unresponsive, it's also typically the reason I'm focusing on that is because I have I've done similar behaviors, and I noticed that in others because I know that I need to change that about myself. So I think so many times the things we focus on also give us an idea of what is it we're trying to change about ourselves or just know more about ourselves. I've also seen that there's certain things that I didn't think motivated me. For example, being at some point like being athletic to a certain degree didn't motivate me. Like I didn't think of that. And then when I was in a situation where I was around people that were at a certain level of fitness, I was like, wow, this is how I also want to be like. And it sort of came up as a result of envy again, like not being able to keep up or like feeling like that's another version of success, right? Like in a more physical sense, feeling successful in that way. I think envy is a very strong motivator if it's used in the right way. And I think that the people closest to you are the people you're actually envious about, not some random person that's online talking about like who's like far, far away from you, because this is more tangible. The people that you can actually see in front of you, you can feel more jealousy from than the people that you just see on a random like tabloid. So I wanted to touch on Thiel Fellowship because you don't normally get to talk about this with anyone. So I just wanted to know, I just wanted to know what your experience was. How did you even get into the Thiel Fellowship? Or there was no once, I think twice you were like 20 under 20, right?
I was never, I think the important thing is I was never Forbes under 20, which means I never went to prison because that seems to be a highly correlated thing these days. But I did a couple things that were fairly impactful to me in college that were outside of UIUC. The first and most impactful thing I did was I became a fellow of this organization that was started by Jane that was called the Kairos Society. And that was kind of Encore's folks at the time. There was an associated investment fund, which I believe is still active, and all those things. Encore, I think, now is probably more famous for starting Built, the credit card points on rent than he is from Kairos Society. But Kairos was extremely impactful on me. And the concept there was kind of like, what if the 100 best student entrepreneurs today knew the 100 best business leaders in the world? How much change could that drive, right? And through Kairos, I had the opportunity to meet and learn from face to face, one on one people like Richard Branson and kind of a bunch of the judges of the X Prize Foundation and like all these amazingly successful entrepreneurs who 18, 19, 20-year-old you have zero exposure to, and now here you are sitting on a couch and next to you is Sir Richard Branson, and you're having a 30-minute conversation about life, about motivation, about value. I wish I'd had those conversations today, actually, because I think today I would be able to take a lot more out of them than I did back then.
Do you remember do you remember what kind of a conversation you had with him?
I remember a few points that make more sense now, which was on focusing on the change that you want to drive, not focusing on your personal success. At the time when I was 18, 19, or 20, it's like, well, you're this ridiculously famous entrepreneur. Why are you talking about not focusing on becoming a ridiculously famous entrepreneur? Like, that's what I want to do. And it was like, no, like that's not the point, right? The point is to bring positive change to the world. And if you make a bunch of money doing that, then great, there's nothing wrong with that, obviously, but the point of the businesses weren't, they had to be profitable to be businesses, right? But the point wasn't to start a more profitable cell phone business with Virgin Mobile, right? The point was to bring better quality cell services to kind of the lower markets who couldn't afford the big carriers, but to bring big carrier like services to those marginalized folks. Like, that was the point. The point wasn't for Richard Branson to become famous and ridiculously wealthy, although he certainly didn't the problem in the journey
In
of
the process,
doing that.
yeah.
And then I also applied to be a Thiel Fellow a couple years, went through the process the farthest in my junior year, and I made the decision that dropping out kind of at the end of my junior year when I only had 1 year left to get my degree probably did not make the most sense in the world. So I never became a Thiel Fellow, which is a very important point. They had another cohort, which was much, much larger, that was called a Thiel Fellowship Summit member, or don't quote me on that, but there was some other cohort. And there were, what was it, twice a year? There were kind of these in-person summits of a bunch of people, including the Thiel Fellows and a lot of Thiel Fellowship mentors. And then there was a bunch of other, ways to get involved and other opportunities to be a part of that community. And that was also impactful, getting to meet Peter and getting face-to-face time with him and getting to learn some of those stories. There was a ton of, very successful mentors that were around that program as well, in addition to the Kairos Society. So I think getting, maybe actually this is more impactful than I thought that it was. But to your point of how did you go down this entrepreneurial journey, I think that perhaps for a lot of people, entrepreneurship is a abstract concept. Through the Thiel and Kairos opportunities, I had the chance to meet the physical manifestations of a lot of these characters. And I think it very much personified that path for me, where it wasn't like Richard Branson or Peter Thiel or some people that I've read in some news article. It's like, no, they're human beings just like me. I've met them. I've talked to them. I've, shaken their hands or given them a hug. I've physically interacted with these people. They're just people. I too can do this. So perhaps more impactful than any of the specific lessons was the personification and kind of making this path a reality versus just something you read about.
I wanna talk about this part of it actually. So when you see entrepreneurship now and how prevalent it's become, do you feel a lot of it is misguided because of how easily the Richard Bransons of the world now are kind of in front of us all the time?
Yes, is the short answer. The much longer answer is I'm trying to figure out how to properly articulate this. I feel like there is so much, I hate the term wantrpreneurship, but I feel like it's probably kind of accurate in this form. And there's so much of the like hustle porn on every social media outlet every time of like, yeah, rise and grind. It's really glamorized being an entrepreneur and starting a startup. And these people are not friends. Most of my friends that are in startups are, very seriously pursuing some very cool things, and I don't want to like minimize them in any way, shape, or form. But I certainly know and have run into many people who are doing a startup because it's cool to have a startup, or it's perceived to be cool to be an entrepreneur. It's a great pickup line to girls at a bar that you're the CEO of this tech startup or something like that. And that really, really, really bothers me. I think that's been a fairly large cultural shift. And I don't know these people intimately, but every single company I've ever seen from these sorts of people has always, without a doubt, crashed and burned. The people that are in entrepreneurship for the sake of calling themselves an entrepreneur, I have never once seen succeed. I'm sure some have. Counterexamples would be great, but that seems to be kind of a rising trend that's coming from a lot of this stuff versus the people that I really respect and the friends that I have done very well and made large impacts with their startups have been founders that are doing it for the impact and to solve the problem, not just founders starting something to call themselves founders.
Is there what do you see? And you've talked about tenacity being like a very key role in this. But what do you see if you were to look at someone and go like, okay, what they're saying they're gonna do? What is it that you're going for? What are you trying to find?
It has to be the most important thing in the world to them. Just cut and dry. Achieving this thing, solving this problem, bringing a solution to X, helping people in Y way, whatever that is. It has to be the most important thing in the world to them. I live and breathe stablecoin payments. That is what I do on a light week, 100 hours a week. Every week, week after week after week, every single day, day after day after day without fail. I cannot not do it. It's one of the questions that I was asked recently from the same friend, and I love my wife very, very dearly. He asked, do you think that your wife understands what you go through? And without hesitating, the answer was an unequivocal no. Like, she certainly sees the impact of it. She certainly extremely supportive, right? I am not home often. I spend a lot of time working on Borderless and not, doing something with her. I spend a tremendous amount of time traveling on planes, in hotel rooms. She spends a tremendous amount of her time alone, which I'm sure is not exciting for her, but she's willing to go through those things, and I'm grateful to have her support. But I think there's a very big difference between being supportive and really understanding what's happening and what someone's going through. And I really don't think that this is something you can understand without going through it yourself. And if winning at this thing is not the most important thing in your life, I think 9 times out of 10, you are not going to do what it takes to win. Startups are highly risky. They're highly competitive. The vast majority, without a doubt, fail. They run out of capital. They get put out of business by others. And especially for others that are competing with us, as an example, this is the thing that matters the most in my entire life that I spend every ounce of my being on. I would ask our competitors that question. Is this the thing that matters the most to you in your life that you spend every ounce of your being on? And if the answer is yes, game on. This is going to be really fun. If the answer is no, then what you are competing against is someone for who this is the most important thing in their life, and they spend every waking moment of their time thinking about this.
I've heard two versions of this competition argument in some ways. Like, how much do people look at their competition? One being, they're like constantly seeing what's out there and then seeing if there's something maybe they can improve, but also they're also, you could be jealous about what's happening in the space that you're in. And the other, I've heard of this too, where people are like, I don't think of competition at all. I'm only focused on what it is that I am bringing out, and how is that unique because of the angle that I am taking. What is sort of, do you see yourself doing both? Like, how do you kind of view competition?
It's absolutely both. And I think that anybody telling you it's not is lying to you. There's a difference between competition as a motivator and competition as something to imitate. I have no desire to look at our competitors and say, oh, they launched that feature, we need to launch that feature. I don't care. I, in many cases, don't know the features of our competitors. The way that we solve the problem, we are purely focused on solving the problem, not on copying what our competitors do. But our competitors are highly, highly motivational. If they get a big win, I want a bigger win. I want more wins. If they land a big enterprise customer, I want to figure out, why did we not land that big enterprise customer? How do we land a bigger enterprise customer? How do we go and land 2 of them, et cetera, et cetera. And if you read any book from any professional athlete, the Roger Federer biography is a great example. He talks a lot about how without Nadal, he never would have accomplished what he accomplished. And that doesn't mean, oh, Nadal has a 2-handed backhand, I'm going to change from one-handed backhand to a 2-handed backhand. It means, shit, Nadal just won. I need to train harder. I need to train smarter. I need to review the tape. I need to figure out how he beat me. That is competition as a motivation, not competition for imitation. And I'm much the same way. I don't care about the features. I'm not going to build the feature that you built. But if you win a deal, I need to understand, why did I lose that deal? And then I need to go win 2 more bigger deals instead.
I hate to reduce this to points, but I'm curious to know, like, if there's 3 skills, let's say, that you are trying to master as an entrepreneur that will actually directly lead to the best business for you, what would that be?
I think a lot of how a startup performs comes down to the team. A lot of it is a game of leverage, and there is very little that I, as a human being, can actually do. But if I can get levered up through an amazing team, there's a tremendous amount that the team itself can accomplish. So what I spend a lot of time doing is I spend a lot of time trying to instill this need to win and this era of competition in the team. We recently had an engineer who was very unhappy that they had to take a meeting on Saturday. That engineer no longer works at Borderless. That's a good example of the things that we don't look for. And it's that I bring this up because it was very mutual. The guy's like, I don't think this is a good fit for me. And I was like, yeah, we agree. This is probably not a good fit for you. Spent a lot of time instilling this need to win and this competition in the team. Spend a lot of time trying to instill kind of first principles problem solving into the team, which is back to the don't copy the features our competitors have, just focus on solving the problem the best way that we can solve it, regardless of how other people are solving it. I think that's incredibly important. And then one skill that I believe that I'm fairly terrible at that I need to improve on as an entrepreneur is capitalizing. I do not have a ton of that. I spend a lot of time talking to our VCs about this and trying to get their perspective on how to position things for capital raise, and kind of there's so much that goes on behind the scenes in that process. And some of the games, I refuse to play the games. I had someone once tell me that before any VC meeting, you should always reschedule it an hour beforehand. That way you're setting the turn. Like, there's a bunch of like these stupid games that people play. Yeah. And
Power
look,
plays.
maybe they're effective, right? Like, the people that I are sharing this advice has raised a lot of money from some very good VCs. So, I'm not knocking them, right? It's clearly worked for them, but I also know that that's not being true to myself. That's not the kind of person I am to do these kind of things. But there are a lot of very worthwhile things around, how you position things, how much do you talk about the current state of the products versus the future vision of the products, those sorts of things. And I spend a lot of time with our VCs talking about these things because I'm very candid, like, hey, you as a VC are pitched, hundreds, if not thousands of times in your year in your career. You have hundreds or thousands of at-bats at this. I have a handful. Help me understand how to articulate these things to have the best chance at raising the right capital. And the capital is less interesting, but from the right partners is much more interesting. That can make the right introductions, that can, provide the right guidance, open the right doors, et cetera, et cetera. I view our cap table as an extension of the team. And, taking a term sheet from a VC or giving an allocation to an angel is the same as hiring someone. And we vet people for the exact same things. To this day, we do not have a single person anywhere on our cap table who's not a builder. And I'm extremely proud of that. Every single person on our cap table is a builder, has created something. It can be in, a wide array of different things. But I want to collect the same team on the cap table as I would in the employees that work at Borderless. I want people that are the best at the things that they do. And we've been fortunate to have, the founders and the CEOs of apex companies in their particular category, the apex predators of that category. A lot of their founders are on our cap table. And that's an incredibly inspiring group of people to be around. But that's something that I really need to improve on as an entrepreneur. And it's something that I think I improve on with time.
I wanted to ask you a little bit more about stablecoins, because I think yesterday I was out with a couple of people that I hadn't seen in the last 10 years. Some people are pursuing entrepreneurship, some people are working, and we were talking about blockchain yesterday, and very few people understand what stablecoins is doing in this mix. What is actually happening? Why are they existing? If someone doesn't know anything about stablecoins and they want to get an idea of how their life will change with stablecoins, how their life could change, what would you say?
I think that the fundamental concept of a stablecoin is to be able to move money around the world in near real time. That's, I think, the very basic thing, right? The fact that it works on a blockchain is an implementation detail. It's not a feature. It's this ability to take, and I would argue this is what differentiates stablecoins from an asset like Bitcoin. Is Bitcoin is, maybe the maxis will massacre me on your YouTube comments. But to me, Bitcoin is not currency. I think it is a wealth building asset, and I happen to have some decent holdings. But for me, a stablecoin is a fiat currency that you can move from point A to point B anywhere in the world in near real time for fractions of a cent or of the transfer value. It's really doing what the internet did with information, which is transferring information and accessibility to information around the world at near real time at virtually no cost. It's doing the exact same thing to money and to payments.
And I think institutions are understanding this because they work with money at a much closer level, and they have to move a lot of this. How do you see the consumer side really get affected by this? Like, what is going to happen if we have stable coins on a day-to-day basis being transferred everywhere?
A lot of what we're seeing is a lot more activity coming out of emerging markets. So a lot of what we're seeing is like Latin America, Africa, a lot of Southeast Asia, where local currencies are not necessarily extremely strong, right? There's high inflation, there's kind of other governmental issues. And for these sorts of people, it's really difficult to access a global reserve currency like the dollar or the euro in traditional forms, right? If I'm some guy living in Argentina, I can't call JP Morgan Chase and say, hey, I've got $50. I'd like to open a checking account from Argentina. That doesn't work. But by being able to have a dollar that exists in a stablecoin form, now I can have it anywhere in the world without needing to go through a gatekeeper like JP Morgan Chase. And I'm now able to kind of save in a global reserve currency, despite the fact that I'm sitting there in Argentina. And we're seeing a lot more payments going from the US and the EU into LATAM and into Africa in the form of payroll, contractors, creators, there's a lot of flows into the Philippines around the outsourced customer service and compliance things, a lot into LATAM around the contractors and gig workers, a lot happening around the creator economy stuff, payouts from TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, et cetera, where people live in these emerging markets and they want to save and get paid in dollars. And stablecoins are a great way for retail consumers to do that.
Why would the government want to support this?
They don't. That's where I think the problems are going to come from. So if you're a nation state, you have an inherent incentive, of extremely strong one, to make sure that you retain control of your currency. And if all of a sudden your population starts to organically save and transact in a different country's currency, like a dollar or a euro, that dramatically weakens your central bank currency. And I think there is a very, very interesting inflection point that is coming over the next 5 to 10 years, where central banks are going to see their currency's power eroding over time. And they're not going to go quietly, so to speak. Whether it's going to be through regulation or kind of through other governmental means, they're going to take action. This is a very controversial opinion, I think. The ability for people to save in stables in a kind of legal way is going to be significantly diminished with those sorts of things, of governmental actions. And I think that stablecoins are going to become a highly efficient transaction and payments mechanism, but I don't think they're going to become an effective payments mechanism. Argentina, I think, as an example, or take, an African country, another Latin American country, or Southeast Asian country, is not going to watch their currency disappear in favor of the US dollar without doing anything about it. They may ban stablecoins, they may force conversions, they may do a lot of other things. But I think ultimately stablecoins are going to represent a much faster and cheaper way to move money across borders. But once that money then crosses borders, it's going to end up saved and retained in that country's local currency. And I know a ton of people will disagree with me on that. Dollarization is an incredibly common narrative in the stablecoin space. It's an extremely popular one. There's a lot of VC dollars being thrown at dollarization. But my kind of slightly contrarian opinion is that that's a very short-term take, and that governments that are used to controlling their own currencies through the central bank are going to end up on staying with their currency. So it's really a payment mechanism, not a value savings mechanism.
So where do CBDCs come into this?
I think CBDCs become the next evolution of government currency, honestly, for the vast majority of governments. I think you'll have some that continue to, money has gone in every currency, money has gone from paper form to digital form. I think the next version of digital form is what I would call internet native form, which is blockchain based. That's kind of the best technology we have today. And countries that are used to privatized services like the US are going to have private companies that are doing a lot of the issuance, like the Circles of the world. Countries that are used to having government-owned services, where the government owns a lot of other infrastructure things, whether it be railroads, schools, hospital, the healthcare systems, commodities, other things like that, which is the vast majority of countries are that way, where a lot more stuff is government-owned than is privatized from like a critical infrastructure standpoint. they're going to end up mostly in the CBDC land. And the CBDC isn't going to be anything special to them other than the next technical evolution of their currency. Now, for the rest of the world, having a CBDC, I think, is going to be much more useful compared to the previous form of their currency, because now we can start to have things like stablecoin dexes, and we can start to do much more efficient liquidity against that currency because we can move it on chain to like a global pool. There's so many advantages that you can do to having that currency on chain. But fundamentally, their citizen is not going to have their life savings in dollars. That citizen is going to have their life savings in that country's CBDC.
Interesting. It reminds me of just seeing the difference in how crypto is used and also encouraged in the US by the people, like individuals. But when you look at the collective in Asia, I can speak a lot from India's perspective. It's like there's a general lack of care about how involved the government is in some of these infrastructural things. Like I don't think in general Indians care too much, for example, about the government being involved in everything that is sort of existing from a foundational layer standpoint, be it payments, be it the railroad, trains and stuff. And in that way, it has led to immense scaling of these products because there's a single entity that has been able to kind of just do everything across. Whereas the US just seems like it's becoming harder and harder to scale such things in the US. What are your thoughts on that? From what I see,
I think, when you look at the US, it's such a different place to be from a money standpoint because it still enjoys the privilege of being the global reserve currency. So you have a fundamentally different dynamic and relationship with money because of that sense. And obviously you know much more about India than I do, but take the blockchain completely out of this and say that someday, because of some technological innovation, all of a sudden the Indian people decide, you know what, I'm going to transact in USD instead of rupees. What would the reaction be of the Indian government? Like that's not a thing that's going to be permitted, right? In the US, you enjoy the fact that your currency is also very much a global currency and is the currency that most trade is denominated in. So you almost don't need to have these governmental efficiencies because those governmental efficiencies are helping you compete on a global market. At the US currency level, you're already the winner of the global market. So as long as you don't lose that positioning, you don't have this competition to push and to improve and to grow and to become more competitive, to become a bigger player in the marketplace. You already are the biggest. And there's a very, very big difference between sitting there and sitting somewhere else. And I would argue that, potentially the US should be a little bit more concerned about China than it is. I'm not a geopolitical expert by any way, shape, or form, but I do find in general, I think the US is very short-term focused, right? Elections can swing wildly from 4 years to 4 years. It seems like people are much more concerned about what they can extract in a 4-year period versus, people often talk about the Chinese system as being a very long-term thinker on the scale of decades of how do they move China into these different global positions. Maybe I'm doing every US politician a disservice. Maybe this is completely wrong. But I don't get that feeling from US politics. I very much get the feeling of short-term mindset and short-term value extraction versus playing some sort of decades-long 3D chess game. And that's sad, but I think that's also very reminiscent of societies that are beginning to be in their decline phase. The global powers throughout history have changed time and time again. The US has enjoyed this position for quite a long time relative to other empires, if you will. And if I had to draw a line in the sand, I would not say that the US is currently on an upward trend. I would say the US is kind of past its peak and in decline. Maybe that changes. Maybe this was just a local maximum and not a global one, and there's still a lot more upswing on the horizon. I don't know, but given the amount of division in the country, given the amount of infighting, given the bloat of governmental waste and other things like that, I don't get the sense of a hungry, innovative, competitive country. I get the sense of a very complacent and infighting one.
a few more questions for you on this. So one is on where you see the younger talent that are now coming out of college. When I talk to people that are like in their 20s or getting out of high school in the US, there's a general lack of concern, I think, or care about being involved in anything to do with this, like how the system is doing. There'll be enough criticism, but there's very little actual involvement with how we can be part of changing this in some ways. How do you see that sort of play out? Like just like from your observations with the conversations you've had, but you talked to a lot of entrepreneurs. Have you seen any involvement that they might have with changing this for the US?
On a personal level, I think I'm extremely guilty of this as well. I spend probably zero time thinking about how to enact governmental level change. I spend all of my time thinking about the business, and I spend very little time thinking about how to have change on this much bigger thing. And I think part of that is likely because it is so massive, but in a bad way, like so bloated that it seems kind of impossible to change. Maybe over the next 4 years with some of the stuff that's happening, that's going to change, and the government's going to get optimized and kind of refocused and become a more manageable institution. From people I talk to, there's a ton of very successful people who I think have the time and who are now trying to drive change on an even greater level than their companies, which is driving change on a governmental level. And there's a lot of time that's spent around education, that's spent around, I guess, what I would call lobbying, for lack of a better word, on certain issues. I occasionally speak with certain people who are now like joining interesting governmental positions where maybe they can enact change from the inside. And obviously, these people are highly focused on enacting government level change. But from the people that I know, it almost seems to be a progression of things where first they become successful entrepreneurs in their kind of business lives, and then they move on to challenge change at a governmental level. But at least within the entrepreneurship circle, I see very little Series A founders that have any mental capacity being devoted to the government. I see many more decacorn founders who are now spending a lot of time thinking about how to do things at the government level. And maybe it's just because that's the next scaling bottleneck for them, right? When you're a unicorn, your next scaling bottleneck isn't how you change government policy. But once you're a 10, 50, $100 billion company, your next bottleneck is probably governmental level policy. There's just not that much more in the existing market structures that you can claim as value. If you think about Visa's a $500 billion market cap company. How do they go from 500 billion to $1 trillion or 2 trillion? It has to be government level change. Like, it's not, we're going to go sign up one more sponsor bank. Like, that doesn't change the market cap in any way, shape, or form.
No, that's a very interesting point. I wanted to end with a couple of tweets that I've seen of yours. So give me your thoughts.
From
on
which Twitter account?
it's your main one, not
Okay.
okay. So this first one is you replying to a tweet. Tweet says, "People don't realize how much strength it takes to pull your own self out of a dark place mentally. So if you've done that today or any day, I'm proud of you." You're replying that, been there, you can do it. There's no shame in getting help if you can't do it on your own.
Everybody always, or I think there's a stigma, which is probably correct, of entrepreneurship being a real roller coaster of emotional highs and lows. But that's certainly been true of my career. There's been the highest of highs and many times the lowest of lows as well. And it's often, at least for me personally, the biggest challenges I've faced have been getting myself out of the lows versus solving the problems that led to the highs. Solving the problem, getting wins, that's all, like, it's hard, don't get me wrong, but it's been easier for me than pulling myself out of emotionally very, very dark places.
So in those moments, how do you go about that?
Yeah. Some of it takes different amounts of time. For me, it's taken sometimes a year or two to like really get out of those things. And it's a mixture of going back to your purpose, going back to your values. Sometimes getting out of bed in the morning is the win for the day. And when you're a highly competitive person like me, that almost makes it worse, right? That's your win for the day. You feel so pathetic that that's your accomplishment. But I think people need to realize if there's others that are in the same headspace, that sometimes that is the win for the day. And entrepreneurship really is the emotional roller coaster. And that's part of why I don't think that you can actually understand what this journey is like without going through it yourself. Because from the outside, it is impossible to feel the same high highs and the same low lows. You may think that you understand, but you don't until you've actually been there. And when you're there alone, it can be an incredibly scary place. And it is a very intense spiral that requires time, requires a lot of gratitude, and requires a lot of patience and understanding, not with anybody else, but just with yourself, to slowly pull yourself out of that one day at a time.
I've noticed in general with very competitive people that it's hard to find gratitude in the daily because you're so focused on. I feel like you have some thoughts on this.
Journals every morning. I think there's a few ways to break it down. The way that I like to think about it is to break it down into amazing people in my life is one. Great things about my physical body are two, like having gratitude for being healthy, being able to go walk around, to eat, to enjoy another day, etc., etc. This is extremely shallow, and I think that's also fine. I am generally a tall person, and I often have gratitude for the fact that I'm tall. I think it makes life a lot easier as a man to be tall. Then three is gratitude about your home and where you live. Four is gratitude about where you work and what you do for a living. Five is gratitude about talents and skills that you have. Six is gratitude about experiences and knowledge that you've gained. And it's funny because sometimes the darkest places that I've been many years later are now some of the experiences I'm the most grateful for. So you never know. It's very cliche, like things happen for a reason. I don't want to repeat that cliche, but you never know how a certain experience may become valuable to you in the future, is the way that I would put that. And then it's, gratitude for the ways that I've experienced luck. And then lastly, gratitude for ways in which my life is abundant. Those are every morning, those gratitudes.
Oh, you do this every morning?
Every morning. This blue journal sits on my desk every morning. That's part of my morning ritual.
I say that you're currently meeting people in situations that are teaching you something you will only learn later. It's the exact same. It's a very hard thing to, I think, realize in the moment that the things that are happening that feel so bad are happening for the better, but that requires a positive outlook, right?
Yep. And I think that, having an abundance mindset and having a gratitude mindset is extremely important, especially as an entrepreneur. When you know that you're going to have those lows, and some are certainly much lower than others, right? Like not everything is binary. You're not 0 or 1. There's all sorts of ranges there. That maintaining some sort of a regular gratitude practice can help you mitigate, or at least have a light when you are in those dark places. And for anybody that is in one of those really dark places, just if you feel like you need help, just DM me on Twitter. I don't know that I will be able to help, but without going into again specific examples, I can DM me. I will do what I can.
I know you will. Last one for you. You again replying to this tweet. Be gut-driven but data-informed. This is the biggest nuance most product people I've met miss. There is a place for data, but it augments, not replaces product intuition. Where does this play in your importance of decision making?
This is a very trivial example, but the example that I love to give is, say that you are a bank or a financial institution or something like that. Has been building some statements. Your KPI often is assets in custody or assets under management. Right? That's kind of the KPI for the business. If you focus on purely the data side, then the worst business decision you could possibly make is building a withdrawal feature, because the withdrawal feature is responsible for 100% of the decreases in your KPI number. But we all know anecdotally that a bank without a withdrawal capability would completely fail as never work as a product, right? And I think Jeff Bezos actually has a great saying that I'm going to butcher and terribly paraphrase, but it's something along the lines of when your intuition and data disagree, typically the data is what's wrong. And it doesn't mean that the data is literally wrong. The data is data. It cannot be wrong. But the way that it's been compiled, filtered, analyzed, etc., is usually what's wrong, not your understanding of the world. And I think as you build products, something that's really important is to use data as a tool that enhances your capabilities, to test things that you're unsure of, to validate assumptions, things like that. But your product is based off of assumptions and vision. The data is the tool that you use. The data isn't the vision in and of itself. It's a little hard to explain, but hopefully that makes some sense.
That makes sense. And it's the same for yourself as a human as well. I mean, like the decisions you make for yourself are very similar as well in some ways. Like there's certain assumptions that you make of the kind of person you become or you want to become. And then you're sort of going into, yeah, you kind of like hypothesizing just like you are in a business about, does this match the actual reality I have from it? I think like internally, you know who you want to be and there's a gut to it, but then there's some data that might be showing you otherwise. And why is there dissonance, I guess, is the
Yeah,
question.
I'll give you another trivial example about yourself. I recently, like a year ago, decided that I wanted to be much more competitive about physical health as part of my general well-being as a person. And you and I know this because we've worked out together, which has always been very fun. But there was a point where I felt a lot healthier, and I stood on a scale and I realized that I had only lost like 5 pounds. And that was weird, right? Like the scale is not wrong. The scale is reporting my weight accurately. My feelings as a person were not wrong. I felt much healthier. I then went and got a DEXA scan and realized that I had gained like 12 pounds of muscle and I had lost like 17 pounds of fat, right? So from a physical health standpoint, I had done a giant 29-pound swing, which is why I felt so much better. But from a net weight standpoint, my weight had only changed by 5 pounds, right? So again, the scale's not literally wrong, but the way the scale is being interpreted in that context, or the way the data is being aggregated, is extremely misleading. And how I felt was definitely right. And then when you get the DEXA scan and you look at the data a different way, then you realize like, wow, that's a lot of fat mass that's gone, and that's a lot of muscle mass that's been added. And those are both very good changes, you know, given where I was physically then versus where I am physically now. So, you know, trivial example, but yes, definitely applies to self as well.
That's a great example. And that just tells us like what really matters is the story we're telling ourselves about what we see and the evidence we have. What is the actual story there? Kevin, thank you so much
Always.
for sharing your thoughts, man. And it's been honestly a pleasure. I send this message to you as well, but I just want to say like a huge moment of gratitude for you because of how much you've helped me personally and just learn. I think you're one of the calmest leaders out there that I've met for especially how young you are and how much more you have to go. So I can only imagine you get even more experience and skill at this skill, which I think is a very respectable skill, just being calm in the midst of a storm.
I
And
appreciate
so
that.
thank you so much.
Definitely. I think as we kind of close out the year, and especially the way we've closed out this episode, I'd love to make a book recommendation. I think my 2024 must-read book is a book called Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It. And I think as we talk about gratitude and we talk about kind of the mentality and we talk about these health aspects, love yourself like your life depends on it is in title and in, you know, full book form, a phenomenal reminder and an extremely important read that I would recommend to anybody, whether they're going into entrepreneurship or business or arts or sports, or it's about people. And therefore it's applicable to everyone, not just, you know, someone in a niche field.
I will link that in and also link this book that you showed,
The Compound Effect.
The Compound Effect. All right. Awesome.